Is Brexit actually bad for the UK? In this video, I discuss where we're up to at the moment in terms of the Brexit deal. But what happens if we get no deal at all? What will that mean for the UK economy? Also, what will that mean for small and medium-sized businesses here in the UK? I'm going to discuss how things might change, but already the changes we've seen since Brexit was initially announced. So let's start from the beginning. What does Brexit actually mean? Well, it means British exit. It's a nickname. So British exit from the European Union or the EU. The UK actually left the EU on January the 31st, 2020. So it's already actually happened. Now the Brexit process actually began way back in June 2016. That's why those of you here in the UK for the last few years, all we've heard on the news is up and down in terms of trade talks. And the main worries most people have, comment below and let me know what you think about this, but the main worries I think is with regards to travel and movement through Europe. Also with regards to those of you who are from the EU actually living here in the UK at the moment. And finally, what impact will all of this have on the economy? And I don't mean like right now, but I mean in 2 years time or in 5 years time. How will it affect the housing market? And I'll get onto that more in just a minute. So a quick recap. Why did people actually want to leave the EU? And why did some people vote to actually remain here in the UK? Well, this is what people felt a few years ago. Those that wanted to leave, the main kind of reasons for that were to actually improve our relationships in terms of trade deals with other countries around the world. The additional reason was also that we actually save money because we have to give the EU a certain amount of money, many billions of pounds every single year. And we could actually use that for other things. Finally, it will give back Great Britain more control with regards to its own laws, rather than having the EU kind of forcefully impose certain laws that we don't really have a choice on. Now, in terms of the Remain camp, the main reasons were basically that it would save people money and save businesses money. We wouldn't have all of these trade tariffs, so it wouldn't cost a lot of money to actually import or export goods. Also, EU companies actually invest billions of pounds every year into the UK economy. So the fear would be that we would lose that investment. Another argument was that even though we're still in the EU, we can still do our own things as well. For example, we still have our own currency. So there are certain things we could actually opt out of. And another worry was we already have so many workers from the EU working here in different types of posts, for example, nursing. And what would happen with Brexit? Would we have lots and lots of unfilled posts? So that's the quick recap. So where are we right now in terms of the current situation? So let me explain that to you as well. And by the way, if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so that you'll receive more financial updates like this. So one of the main problems at the moment is we have 3 million EU nationals living here in the UK. And the idea is that they won't need a work visa. They can continue to work here. But also we have around 1 to 1.3 million UK citizens working in the EU. And the discussions at the moment are for them to have the exact same deal. Next, the UK will pay what's called a divorce bill to the EU of £33 billion for this actual process to continue to go through. The massive worry is if a trade deal is not agreed in time or is not extended further in terms of the amount of time they have to discuss this, then what will happen is we'll just default to the deals EU already has with outside countries worldwide. But this is where it gets interesting. What are the consequences? Well, a lot of these changes have already happened, and some of the changes in the economy that we were expecting to see haven't happened or haven't been anywhere near as bad as first forecast. A really good example of this is the housing market, for example. So back in 2018, the Bank of England had predicted with Brexit, we get a drop in house prices of 30%. Now that hasn't happened at all. In fact, if anything, we've actually seen house prices rise further. Also, lots and lots of rules are actually still in place. One to note is flight cancellation policy. So previously, you were insured in terms of flight compensation if you were flying to the EU. Now that actually still remains and that hasn't changed at all and is not planning to change. Also, a massive worry everybody had was requiring visas to actually visit other countries like France, Germany, etc. Now how it's looking at the moment is for short stays like up to 90 days, you might not need a visa at all. And even if you did for a longer stay, the cost of the visa might only be something like 5 or 6 British pounds. My opinion on this with the pandemic and the effects it's had on tourism is extremely unlikely that they're going to impose anything that's stricter than what they have at the moment. The reason for that is the EU can't afford to lose UK British tourists and vice versa. So in my opinion, I actually don't think a lot's going to change with regards to just traveling or taking vacations throughout Europe. Another thing that's actually going to happen is the red passport will turn to blue, and this will take effect from around June 2021. So any new kind of passport applicants or any new renewals, you'll actually get a blue passport and not a red one. Now, if your passport is already expiring many years down the road, then you don't need to change anything. Another thing people are wondering, what's it going to be like just driving through Europe? Now, what they're considering at the moment is a driving permit. Again, a small cost for this, maybe £5 or £6. And that might be something you renew on a regular basis. So kind of inexpensive again. But the problem with all of this, in my opinion, is it's just adding a lot more paperwork. And especially for smaller businesses, this is going to create friction, create extra costs, waste time, which in general, you would expect over the long term will actually reduce their revenue. Also, by the way, there was a worry that EU citizens, EEA citizens or Swiss citizens here in the UK already working here would have to suddenly leave. Now, that's not the case at all. In fact, they can continue to work here and remain here. What they might need to do after June 2021 is register for an EU settlement scheme. Now, as far as I know, there's no more details on this at the moment, but again, it's probably just a bit of paperwork they have to fill out rather than making any extreme kind of decisions. So you can see that just by what I've talked about, it's nowhere near as bad as people were making out. And again, in my opinion, I don't think they can do anything too severe because it will just affect businesses throughout Europe, and this is not good for any of the countries involved. However, my experience with this and online businesses, it does hit revenue because myself and I imagine many other online sellers here in the UK, they've actually cut what they're doing in other countries throughout Europe in terms of sales and in terms of sending inventory. And strangely, it's not necessarily because we think something's going to happen in any of these countries or it's going to be more difficult to sell. It's mostly because of confusion and because of extra paperwork that's required. So I think a lot of other small businesses will also think, why bother? Look at what's happened in the last few years. There's so much confusion, so much kind of news headlines changing day to day that it doesn't make sense to take that additional risk. Now, this is bad for the economy in general, but I think that's what's going to happen. I think we are going to get a drop in GDP that's been accelerated, of course, by this pandemic. However, if things change with trade deals outside of the EU, then that situation could reverse, but it could take time. So we might get 3 to 5 years of slowing growth every year before we actually see an uptick or a change. Also, a quick word with regards to the pound and euro rate at the moment. Now, in terms of the FX market, there's been complete confusion over the last few months. There's been an assumption that if we move more towards a no deal or kind of a difficult exit, then this will be bad for the pound and the pound will get a lot weaker. While again, I think that's true in the short term, and that's a perception. What we've seen in the FX market this year is it's just we're trading in between a range at the moment, and there's no clear trend with regards to what the pound will do over the next 5 years against the euro. There's no clear trend with regards to whether it will get a lot stronger or a lot weaker. So I would say don't make that assumption that the pound is definitely going to drop in the next couple of years because of what's going on. As I've discussed in this video, things aren't anywhere near as bad as people are making out. Another thing I wanted to point out as well is over half of all United Kingdom's exports and imports went to the EU. So the EU is still one of the main trading partners for the UK. And I think regardless of the type of deal, we're going to be affected there. And the massive worry is with a no deal Brexit, what they're projecting is the UK, if it leaves the EU without any sort of agreement, then the GDP of the UK will decline as much as 8%. The Bank of England also predicted that unemployment could peak at 7.5%, and house prices, like I mentioned before, could decline as much as 30%. Now, in my opinion, we're just not seeing that, and I don't think it's anywhere near as severe as they're making out. I actually think the effects of the pandemic and generally the kind of online revolution and death of brick and mortar stores, I think that is having a much larger impact, but nobody's really talking about that. That's all kind of happening behind the curtains. So that's basically the situation at the moment. Let me know what you think. How bad do you think a no deal Brexit would be for our country? Do you think it's going to be like what we've seen in the last 12 to 18 months, not anywhere near as bad as what we're expecting? Or do you think there's going to be a lag, like I believe, that we're actually going to see the effects on the economy, but a little bit later down the road, so kind of a year or two down the road, rather than see it happen all in the short term? Because especially for businesses and people, making life decisions takes time. You don't do it immediately. It can take a year or two. When you're making a difficult decision, for example, whether to leave a country or whether to leave a particular job posting or whether to cut down on your business and current trade agreements. Thanks very much for listening.